Hello, everybody. I'm Dominic Hobson, co-founder of Future of Finance. Welcome to our webinar. It will take technology to humanize human resources. Our title is, of course, paradoxical. Human resources professionals, as the name suggests, deal with humans. They hire them, they fire them, they guide them, they train them, they listen to them, they support them, they monitor them. Above all, they help to decide how much they're paid. And fulfilling those tasks requires a range of specifically human capabilities: emotional intelligence, communication skills, relationship building, abstract reasoning. These are, of course, precisely the abilities that technology conspicuously lacks. But humans are also defined by their ability to use sophisticated tools. And this is where artificial intelligence, or AI, meets human resources, or HR. HR, or at least its largest and most important component, namely compensation, has emerged as one of the most promising use cases for AI. Why is that? It's because pay is driven by data. Data is rich in insights. AI eats data and finds those insights exceptionally fast. The implications for HR, including the number of people who work in it, I might say, what contribution those people can make to corporate value add, and what part they play in reducing the risks that getting human resources decisions wrong represent, are potentially immense, even transformative. Let us work out what those implications might be. We're joined by four experts in the field of human resources and technology. Todd Gershkovitz is co-CEO and co-founder at Pay Standards, which leverages AI to help companies make pay and other talent decisions more data-driven, defensible, and explainable. Anthony Poole is a partner in the Human Capital Group at Aon, where he leads the industry sector focus for investment organizations and also Aon's pay transparency proposition across the EMEA region. Harry Singh is a partner at IBM Consulting and leads the HR consulting practice for the UK and Ireland. Eric Weinberg is Vice President and Head of Executive and Equity Compensation at Prudential Financial. He engages in research projects and speaking engagements to challenge conventional wisdom and the status quo in his field. Now, in addition to our panelists, we do also, of course, have you, our audience, and all five of us encourage everybody watching or listening to submit questions and comments throughout this webinar by using the Q&A or chat functionality at the bottom of your Zoom screens. I won't save any questions and comments up to the end, but we'll endeavour to answer them as we go along. So you, as a member of the audience, can be an integral part of this discussion right from the outset. Of course, to some extent, you've already been part of this discussion because when you registered, you completed our multiple choice questionnaire. And I'm going to share with us what you told us in the course of this webinar, starting with the very first question, the first slide where I presented how HR contributes, or the question you answered was, what best describes the contribution of the HR function of your organization to increasing sales, widening profit margins, increasing productivity, accelerating innovation, and lifting the share price? And I hope in just a minute that the slide will appear on your screens and you'll be able to see what your answers amounted to. Most of you gave a fairly traditional answer, which is that HR invests in people. Many minorities gave the cynical answer about HR, which is that it does what it's told, it's an overhead, and regulators demand it, and if they didn't, we wouldn't otherwise have it. To me, the most intriguing answer is that 29%, the second bar from the left, of you that said HR manages people risk. But I'd like to begin by asking Todd whether we might be on the cusp of some sort of paradigm shift in HR. After all, humans are the biggest liability at any company, but increasingly, of course, the biggest asset as well. As the old corporate cliche has it, our assets walk out the door every evening. We have to make sure they still come back the next morning. So getting humans wrong is potentially catastrophic. A company might lose its key competitive advantage if people leave. The company might fail to attract the people it needs to deliver the product or service that it sells. It may fail to persuade its existing people to adopt a new technology which could transform productivity. It might get sued into oblivion by a disgruntled employee. Or to take a very obvious risk, labour costs might simply spiral out of control. So my question to you, Todd, is, are that 29% pointing to a need to actually reframe HR as a risk management function?
Thanks, Dominic. And yeah, I think it's true that HR is accountable, and maybe it's shared accountability with the business for managing the talent risk of a company. All the things you mentioned, and I assume that's where also the responses to the question come from. And I think what that's about is making sure there's, in my view, making sure there's consistency with regulatory requirements, consistent application of policies, consistent treatment of employees. If you're not consistent in those ways, then I think that creates risk. And I think the HR function, I think, spends more time with its risk mission, because I think it depends a lot on data, and it depends a lot on, it's resource intensive, depends a lot on people. I think AI represents an opportunity to transform how HR fulfills its risk mission. And I also think it will enable HR to fulfill another part of its mission, perhaps a more significant part of its mission, which is a part of its mission. And that's, I think, the 45% is, how do we make sure we have the human capital and we're investing in the human capital to get the company, to make sure the company can grow.
You mentioned data, Todd, and really this webinar is going to be all about data and technology, or indeed AI. But before we move on to that, could we just dispose very quickly of the cynical minority in that first slide? Maybe one in 8 of our respondents who one of our friends describes HR as, open inverted commas, pure overhead, close inverted commas, possibly has in mind the fact that HR is sort of overstaffed. And I did see a report which suggested the average size of the HR department at a Fortune 1000 company is 1,200 people. That sounds like quite a lot of people. How can it be inefficient? And the answer our audience gave to the second question, so I'm going to ask for our second slide to appear now, which gives us an idea of what respondents' experience of their own HR department is actually like. We have around half of them, as you can see, saying it's 48% saying it's HR is fast and efficient. But if you add up the other two columns there, you've got about the same proportion thinking that HR is at best adequate and at worst very slow and inefficient. Todd, how fair is it that HR has this reputation for being overstaffed and inefficient, and whether it is or not, is this an opportunity for AI to make HR less staff heavy and more efficient?
I think so. I think that it's a bit unfair, that characterization, because I think when you think about what HR does, a lot of what HR does has to do with managing information about the people that work in the company in order to make the best possible decisions about those people for both the benefit of the company and the benefit of those employees. Depends a lot on information, and having insights about that information and being able to manage it and take action based on it fast and intelligently. I think even though there's been a lot of great HR technology over the last several years, there's been very specialized HR applications that have come on the market. I think a lot of HR professionals, and having been one, we bought a lot of that technology, but it didn't really actually, I don't think, add as much value as we might think. I think it ended up being more technology, more people to manage it, not easy ways to get all the data and insights out of it integrated. AI represents an opportunity to change all that. And I actually think it will dramatically improve not only the efficiency, but the effectiveness of the HR function of the future. And yes, it may be that HR doesn't have to have as many people in it, because it can leverage technology finally in a way that allows it to get more focused and more strategic and supporting the business, but also fulfilling its risk mission.
Anthony, you've just heard Todd say that his own experience of technology in HR has been mixed, but he's very optimistic about AI changing that pattern. You obviously spend a lot of time sharing data with people working in HR, helping to understand and gain insights into what's happening in the marketplace as well as in their own firm. What's your view? To what extent do the HR people that you talk to demonstrate the capabilities to actually capitalize on the advances being made in AI?
Yeah, thanks, Dominic. And actually, just as I was reviewing that slide, that chart of whether HR is fast and inefficient or slow or otherwise, I think whenever I look at a broad data set like that, I am minded of the different I guess, models or approaches we're taking to HR within an organization. Some of our clients have intentionally high touch HR models, some have intentionally lower touch HR models, and we are somewhat in a broad phase of change in that regard. So I think when you look at a response like this, you have to appreciate some of the models that sit behind it, and maybe some of that is more intentional rather than just an outcome. But back to your question, Dominic, when you think about capabilities, ultimately, I would have to say, based on our experience and when we think about the types of organisations, I think that are largely in this discussion on this call, different sizes and shapes of organisations means that it is really quite mixed based on the size of the team, right? Do we have a fully developed HR function that has a big HR management information team? That's where a lot of the technological capability can come to. Or are we a bit more of a smaller and perhaps higher touch HR generalist type groups? So we can certainly see differences in that regard. One of the examples I think we're going to talk about later on is around, Moderna has been much publicized. They brought their HR and technology functions together. Maybe that is a nod to the future, but it's certainly unique at this stage. I think part of the question as well for HR is, what's the degree of change that they can cope with and how quickly? We're probably already doing some HR AI implementation, but maybe not an awful lot. And in a recent discussion, actually, with some clients in a panel session that we held, it was clear in the examples that they gave around really simple things of sharing a cheat sheet in HR of how we use AI or chat GPT type functions to try and encourage more of it, which would suggest not a high degree of capability, but really an entry level starting to use. The pace of change of technology, I think, is also proving a real challenge there as well, as HR individuals struggle to keep up with new developments. So I think a bit mixed, but probably towards perhaps the lower end of the development curve.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Anthony. Eric, you've heard Anthony. One of the points he made was that to capitalize on AI, you need the right sort of people inside your HR department. But it occurs to me that actually HR has been using AI for quite a long time, particularly to manage and screen large numbers of job applications, interviews by avatars, for example. Do you have a sense of what the industry has learned from its experience with AI so far? It's often said, for example, that in these interviews by avatars, that applicants and employers learn to sort of game the algorithms, and so your outcome gets distorted. And I wouldn't want you to get fixated on avatars particularly, but what's the industry learned from its experience of AI so far?
Sure. And I think, important, excuse me, it's important at first to understand the distinction that today the term that we use, AI, encompasses multiple different areas, including many things that weren't called AI before. It was data and analytics. It was predictive analytics. It was different things that in the field, the HR function at many organizations has building capabilities in these areas, and part of it comes from, and I think what we're seeing, to the example that you just provided, organizations, HR functions need to adapt. The competitive environment is constantly changing. The idea of candidates, applicants being able to game the system, the same innovations, the same ideas happened at the advent and a CV or a resume, right? The idea of how that grew over time into something quite different, and just the search terms used that candidates and organizations were helping job seekers identify the key words that they needed to use to make sure that their resume made it to the top of the stack. So it's a constant in dynamic environment that we're always working in. And I think the biggest thing that we've learned and what we're seeing with AI now in the HR field is that the use case and where it really makes sense is for things that don't need to be perfect. And what do I mean by that? I'll give two examples. One at Prudential that we've had extremely well received. I personally get a lot of value out of it. Is an AI enabled coaching tool. helps with crafting an email where I want to convey a certain message and I want to make sure that I'm aligned with the cultural values and the way that the company wants us to interact and exhibit certain leadership behaviors. Helps prepare for performance reviews with employees and delivering hard conversations. These types of things, the coaching aspect, if it didn't give me the greatest advice, if it didn't give me the perfect answer, it's still tremendously helpful that I have this to work with and that managers at the organization have this to work with to develop confidence in the messaging and in interactions with among employees. Whereas in executive compensation, I'm not going to use an algorithm or a formula to tell me how much money to pay or what to offer to a senior executive external hire, right? You don't want to get that wrong. You don't want to go with even if the algorithm can be so good that it gives the 80%, 90% best thing. No, the things that need to be perfect right now are not the use case for HR, but things that good is actually great. That's where I think a lot of organizations are seeing it's worth investing in and adopting AI tools more.
Thank you, Eric. You made a number of extremely important points, one of which is that there's nothing new under the sun. People have been gaming the recruitment process since long before digital technology even came along. You've also made the point that the best is the enemy of the good in this field, and that you shouldn't rely on an AI to tell you what to do. You do need to use your judgment as an HR professional. But most importantly, you mentioned that a lot of what's called AI is just a relabeling of stuff which HR people have been doing for a while, which is mining and viewing and monitoring data to look for useful insights. Now, what AI does, of course, is eat a lot of data. It indeed depends upon data. Now, in theory, HR functions possess or have access to an awful lot of internal data, obviously about compensation and benefits, about salary scales and grades, about management spans, but they'll also have data about levels of employee satisfaction, engagement, productivity, performance. They'll be able to look at, I guess, customer perception surveys as well. They'll have records of people's absence and sickness. They'll look at how much time they spend and costs they incur when they travel. They'll know what accreditations people have, what training courses they've been on, what compliance courses they know. They'll know how much holiday entitlement they have. And I suppose exit interviews too would tell you quite a lot about what's going on inside your company. There's an awful lot of internal data which HR departments have access to. And before I ask Anthony and again Eric about this, let's see what our audience said. Was we asked a question. This is our third slide about how good HR departments are at accessing and using internal data. And we get a pretty clear answer here. Just 3% say they have fully automated the process of management of internal data. Nearly a quarter are still relying entirely on manual processing with that data analysis and prediction that Eric mentioned. And the rest, 3/4 of our respondents are somewhere in the middle. They've automated some of their internal data flows. And that sounds to me like a huge opportunity for AI, but I wonder how real it is. Anthony, did you want to chip in on this? You've already given us a view on, the variation in the capabilities of different HR people, but is there anything to add, having looked at this data point?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, this is probably a fair outcome, Dominic, from what we've seen. There's a lot of appetite for this stuff, but it's probably a bit varied. Yeah, just to give you a data point, we did a study on HR priorities in investment management organizations in 2025. This is from just August, about 60 organizations. They rated AI and technology in HR as number 2 in their long-term HR priorities. So it's right up there, and it is something that we certainly recognize AI can really help with bringing these disparate data sets together. I think in many instances, the pause in organizations is about thinking, what are the outcomes we want to get to? So what are we really trying to know or discern from that data when we bring those data sets together? I'll give you some examples. Probably some of these are more simple, some may a little bit more advanced. But we have seen examples looking at, who are our best managers, people managers, based on performance ratings, particularly how they've changed over time, and exit interview feedback. Looking at attrition predictions based on compensation analysis, where do we sit relative to market, and engagement feedback from those certain groups. What does that tell us about where we're trending, where we might see attrition coming from? We've seen in a couple of the large banks really good examples of massively improved efficiencies around the performance management process. That is one where we are getting very disparate data. We've got KPIs around business performance, certainly for front office employees. We've got a lot of feedback, both from the employee, from the line manager, from peers, that we need to bring together. And in the past, we probably haven't made the best use of that information, but AI is able to manage that disparate information and really bring so much efficiency into that process to cut down the amount of time that we're investing. So progress for sure. I think one of the other challenges is at what point do we turn the organization's AI capabilities and muscle onto the HR function? Because often we're pointing that maybe more direct drive revenue or frontline commercial activity. At what point does HR start to get the focus and the drive of some of that great power that we have?
Anthony, this might be a stupid question, but are you able at this point to determine what best practice is and then benchmark different firms against that best practice? I'm talking about the use of AI in HR.
I would say that's pretty difficult right now, Dominic. Best practice. I'll probably go back to the Moderna example. We started to bring tech together with HR because we really need to think about the outputs that we're driving, the work that we're doing, and where that work best sits. But I think there's so much to unpack in relation to the tasks and the subtasks, and where we put automation versus people. A view on that, I think when you start to break it down, underneath that lies all the skills of the people. But when you start to break it down, we think automation probably sits in those subtasks. And that means we can start to drive efficiencies from there. But I think that everyone's on such different scales at this point. We haven't actually started to benchmark that, but it's something that I'm sure we'll come to as the pace quickens and we get to a little bit more of a level playing field.
Eric, did you want to add something on this question of, look at the chart in front of us, it's screaming at me that there's a big opportunity for AI here to help HR departments run their internal data more efficiently, extract more insights from it. Am I delusional, or is the opportunity a real one?
So I might be accused, I have been before, of being a foolish optimist. So that might come through in this answer here a little bit. I think we should look at this from two different angles. The first is, let's call it the infrastructure, and then second is data quality or data hygiene. On the infrastructure side, important to recognize over the last decade, 2 decades, maybe a little longer, the tools, the organizations that have grown to manage HR data, people-related data, the capabilities have just really exploded, and it's only going to get better with AI. And that will even help with the second piece, which is the data hygiene, the data quality. But that, I think, is really the key. It's the data that are being used. Just to draw a comparison to the business, directly to the business, right? You can't make the right decisions on where you're going to invest and where you're going to try and increase your market share if you don't have the right data, the right analytics on your customer base and customer opportunity. You're not going to make a profit and maximize a profit if you don't have the right data, the right analysis around pricing, around opportunity, around competitor pricing, and these types of things, right? We know that it's absolutely essential to make the right decisions and to win against the plethora of companies that we're all competing against. It's only possible through good quality data, and that perspective is needed to make the right people decisions, to manage and come to the right insights and get the analytics out from the data. It takes an organization that has a culture where it matters. We care about keeping the data up to date, and where, again, with the infrastructure and the improvements and so forth, we make it easy for managers, for employees themselves, when that's pertinent, and for all the data collection. So I think that's the piece to focus on, and for this to really be a topic at among leadership teams at our organizations.
Thank you, Eric. Before we leave this subject of internal data, Todd, could I just ask for your perspective on this? That long list of data points I read out at the beginning of this section describe data which is under the control, if you like, of the HR department. Eric has raised questions like understanding the customer, understanding pricing, understanding your competitors. Now, not all that data is going to be controlled by the HR department. Some of it's going to be in the finance function or the business unit or the product units. And of course, that data is going to be scattered throughout the organization. It's going to be in different formats on separate systems. So you probably have these internal management and data format silos within an organization to overcome before you can start to really capitalize on your data and the HR department start to build up a complete picture of how it can help an organization improve its competitive advantage. What's your experience of how hard it is to overcome those system and silo barriers?
Yeah, I love this question because I think it illustrates the real true value of where AI is headed, and where it is and where it's headed, I should say. You're right, Dominic, that getting finance data integrated with HR data, integrated with external data, for example, versus internal data in the HR domain, let's say competitive pay data versus internal information about employees and jobs and so forth. All of that is really has been challenging. The data exists in different places. There has been technology available to try to integrate it. Companies like Workday, for example, they have both a HR platform that's virtually ubiquitous now and a finance platform. But I don't think that the promise of fully integrated data between those two sources has been realized. AI, especially the latest advances in AI, so-called agentic AI, I think are where now leveraging AI, you can actually integrate data from multiple sources more easily, large amounts of data, and you can integrate both structured and unstructured data. So just a quick example of what I mean. Take looking at finance and HR information. A lot of finance data that you might want to leverage for the purposes of managing people and managing compensation, for example, might be data that exists at the business unit level, not necessarily at the individual level in a company. So financial targets, quantitative metrics, and so forth. Chances are there's a lot of spreadsheets that have how that data is broken down into individual level metrics. It's very unstructured. AI can actually take advantage of that. That kind of technology hasn't existed before. It can actually scan all of that unstructured information and integrate it with structured information, which is what resides in Workday and let's say Oracle or SAP. Not playing any favorites here in terms of the receptacle of where the data sits or the database where it sits, both HR and finance. That is the true magic, I think, of where we're headed with what AI can bring. That really has not existed before.
Todd, you said earlier that you had mixed experience with the technology being applied in HR departments. Could I throw at you a very cheeky question from Henry Rashan, who's a member of our audience? He says, 20 years ago, Oracle bought PeopleSoft. To what extent does HR as a database now run its course? That question probably means something different to you to what it means to me, but do you recognize where Henry is coming from?
I do, and I'm sure my fellow panelists are going to want to weigh in on this one. But when you look at the Workdays or Oracle/PeopleSoft or SAP or other platforms, there are large databases that have allowed companies to consolidate all of their HR data in one very sophisticated database that can also then be used to execute actions and transactions on behalf of employees. I think in addition to those platforms, providing that capability to companies, a lot of very specialized HR technologies come on the market in the last 10, 15 years, as I said earlier, to focus on how you would do things, let's say in recruitment or in talent management, in skills development. And HR functions, I think, have had to supplement perhaps the abilities in those large human capital platforms with more specialized applications that allowed them to use the data that's stored in those platforms in certain ways. And that's where the HR function, I think, in many ways has had to deal with several, a large HR human capital database and several specialized HR applications. And the promise of knitting together what all those applications generate in terms of the output and making it do more for the company in terms of generating insights and ultimately actions has been hard to achieve. It's required a lot of additional resources, and it's actually been more expensive. It goes back to your question earlier about, is the HR function, quote unquote, overstaffed? AI, and particularly agentic AI, which can actually go beyond prior versions of AI in terms of actually synthesizing large amounts of data from multiple sources, structured and unstructured, and determining a recommended range of solutions for a manager to decide from that is a narrower solution set than they could have ever developed on their own. And it can be done faster, it can be done objectively. It doesn't give them the answer. I take Eric's point. It's not saying here's the number, here's the action. It's just helping them to get to a more informed and consistent solution set than they would have been able to on their own. And it will, I think, generate a lot of efficiency that has not existed before. And they're also more effective decisions as a result.
Does anyone else want to chip in on Henry's question on this issue as we move on to looking at external data? Anthony, Eric, Parry, you've been very patient and quiet, and I'm about to put you to the test on external data. But did you have anything to add on this question of how software has evolved over the last 20 years?
Yeah, I think the only point I would add is that HR as a system of record is no more the way we look at most of these core platforms, whether it's Workday, SuccessFactors, Oracle. The real value lies in how you actually leverage and build intelligence on top of it, whether applying AI or any other automation to drive value out of it. So if we no more see HR just having a storage of data, but it's about how do you build the intelligence on top of it to drive value and insights. That's the key shift that we are seeing both in our organization as well as with the clients.
Okay, so the age of data warehouses alone is over. We now need tools for rummaging around and finding things in the data warehouse. But let's move on to the question of external data, which is obviously crucial to the effectiveness of AI. And we just brought up our fourth slide, which is based upon the answers of the audience to our poll when people registered. And the question is, how good at managing this external data are HR departments? And there's an awful lot of external data. We've discussed some of it already. I was talking to Anthony there about compensation benchmarking, but there are also, of course, economic labour market statistics. There are job portals, which I think are a very valuable source of what young people particularly, perceive about companies. There's commentary portals, there's lots of demographic information. Then, of course, there are all these emerging industries and skills. At Future of Finance, for example, we see a lot of people tracking which blockchain protocols talented developers are moving to. That's a sign of success or failure in that area. Then, of course, there's all the education and training statistics, there are legal databases, and so on. But you can see that our audience has a pretty clear view on this subject as well. It's not dissimilar to their view on internal data management, except it's sort of slightly worse. It's saying that HR departments are less adept at managing external data than internal data, whereas we saw performance is already fairly patchy. Now, Parry, in your experience, and you've just touched on this, how adept are HR functions at integrating these external data sources, and marrying them up with internal data, and then using them to make decisions, to obtain insights and make decisions? How good are HR functions at at rummaging around in the data warehouse and finding things that are useful?
So, Dominic, the answer is most of the clients that we deal with, they are working or moving in a direction wherein they want to bring the internal as well as external data insights to drive a narrative. And really, that is what differentiates or distinguishes leading HR functions, which is the ability to combine the internal data and the external data and build a narrative or build an insight. So let me give you a few examples. So for example, in IBM itself, we have a platform or a tool that all managers in IBM have. It's called the Compensation Advisor. And what it does is it essentially pulls data on your comp ratio. So if I'm looking at a salary review for one of my team members, it will tell me where the person sits on the comp ratio from a market data. So that's external insight. It also gives me information on how the performance has been. So that data is pulled from an internal platform. And it also gives me a skills data. So essentially it combines information on what are the skills IBM considers as key skills for the organization and the business, and from the individual's learning records, it's able to marry up and say what are the skills that an individual has and whether those are skills that are high in demand or versus those that are commodity in the market. And then it combines this data set and gives a recommendation to the manager saying, here's broadly the range of raise that you should be considering. Now, again, another key point to remember here is while this is all done using AI and comparing internal and external data, the manager will still have to apply the judgment to then go ahead and make the final decision. But very quickly, the manager has really tangible, relevant information, both from external and internal databases or sources to make a judgment. And that's really the power. Now, organizations, as I said, are moving in that direction. I mean, I know a lot of organizations, when they look at attrition analysis or engagement scores, they will also look at what is being posted in external sites like Glassdoor, and they kind of combine the databases. The answer to your question as to what extent, I think it varies by organizations. But the key point to remember is that the leading organizations are building that capability to combine external and internal data insights.
Thank you. All right, Todd, we must start talking about AI directly, but just before we leave the subject of data, to what extent, Todd, and there's a question for you, Todd, is data privacy and confidentiality a constraint on the use of internal or external data or its quality? Can those constraints be overcome?
Yes, I mean, yes, it is a constraint, of course. The data is so key here. And we're dealing with the company's most sensitive information, and as everyone knows, there are very stringent regulations, particularly coming out of Europe, on how that data is handled. But in this day and age, everyone is concerned about data security and data privacy. Companies have very strict standards rooted in regulation, but also in their own policies. And so it's absolutely essential that the strictest standards can be met in terms of data security and data privacy. And it can be done. It is a constraint that must be met. Data must be encrypted at rest and transmitted only when it's completely de-identified. So individual data cannot be tracked back to any individual or to a company. At Pay Standards, this is something we, for example, had to invest a great deal of resources in to make sure that we can meet any company standards, which we do. So it is a constraint, but it can be solved. It requires investment and resources. And Dominic, if I could, just to come back to something Perry was talking about, which I totally agree with, about integrating internal and external data to make good pay decisions. What the latest advances in AI really allow you to do is to expand the aperture of those data sources. There are so many other variables. This is what we're doing at Pay Standards. We're bringing in multiple variables, data that's structured and unstructured, internal and external, to inform how pay decisions are made, and then other talent decisions ultimately. And not only at the end of the year, but throughout the year, at any point in time, a new hire, promotion, an off-cycle action has to be taken, a counteroffer. And if I could also connect back to an earlier question you brought up, Dominic, which is the size of the HR function and the efficiency of it, and some of the data from the respondents to the survey. One of the key functions HR performs is it supports managers in their day-to-day dealing with people issues. Managers spend at least a third of their time on people issues, and that time should be spent the best way possible. If it's spent chasing information and executing and transacting, that's not a good use of the time managers spend on people issues. They should be spending that time talking to their people, understanding what motivates them, what development needs they have, what obstacles they can clear for them, providing feedback, etc. To the extent that AI, especially agentic AI, which implies that AI can act as an agent on your behalf, can actually streamline, simplify, and improve the quality of recommendations that managers recommended actions to managers so they can make better decisions. That would allow HR to focus more on being strategic and long-term in what it's doing, supporting the business, senior management of the business, provide an on-demand resource to managers to make decisions that are made faster, but also better. And again, picking up on something Eric said, and also what Kari said, it's not giving you the answer. It's giving the manager a more informed range of solutions to choose from. And anywhere within that range is probably acceptable. That is the real advance that we're talking about. And that could allow the HR function to get smaller and more efficient while still supporting its managers and also supporting the senior management of the business, and probably doing it even better than they've ever done before.
Thank you, Todd. Now we're into the final third of our time today, and we haven't yet talked directly about AI. So let's do that now. And I think a useful starting point is how our audience have said they're using AI in their organizations. And our fifth slide shows what examples people gave. And you can see, you look at the first bar on the left-hand side, AI is used very heavily in recruitment. I don't think that will surprise anyone. We've already talked about the use of avatars, and of course CV sifting is mentioned there, among other ways in which people are using it. The items marked in red, performance feedback, technology engineering, drafting policies, summarizing data, the sort of ways that we use it. Although it's interesting to note there that actually quite a few people are not using, among our audience, not using AI at all. What surprised me, though, is there wasn't much sign that people are using what I would think of as the most useful applications of AI, such as forecasting the sort of skills you might get. Eric mentioned this earlier, so much for AI as a prediction machine, which is where it first came in. We're not seeing it being used to monitor employee attrition particularly. We're not seeing it used to identify those underperforming employees. We're not seeing it being used to help career planning, particularly of talented individuals in the organization. So Perry, perhaps I could come to you first as a consultant, as a technology vendor as well. IBM must see what companies are actually using AI for. So what evidence or information do we have that AI is going to lead to these better decisions by HR managers in those sort of areas where it's clearly underused? And I'm thinking here of things like, we've touched on this a number of times. Eric certainly brought it up. You have to use your judgment if you're going to make an offer to hire somebody, or a counter offer to a key employee who's going to leave. At the same time, you probably want to encourage certain underperforming employees to leave the organization. Can AI help you do that? And can it help you map those successful career paths for the people you really, really want to keep and grow inside the organization? Does AI do a better job in those sort of areas than traditional data mining, data prediction, plus a bit of human intuition, experience, and judgment?
Look, the evidence that using AI leads to better HR decisions is growing. But the key point to remember is it works with the human partnership and judgment. So it's not an isolated area wherein you just don't rely on AI to make decisions. Of course, you could do that in things that are very rule-based and repeatable. But where we see real value coming in is where HR leaders are combining AI with human judgment and then driving decisions. So what we are seeing is it becomes more powerful and faster. Simply, if you think about analyzing data or employee survey data, the time it would have taken to analyze the qualitative comments would have taken a long time. But summarization capability is one of the most basic capabilities of generative AI, which you could certainly very, very quickly drive insights. But as you drive insights, you still need the contextual and the experience of the leaders or HR professionals who are involved in that to actually look at that insight and analysis and refine it a little further before it's kind of shared externally. So the evidence is there. It is really, really helping, both by saving time and also by analyzing various sources of data. But where it is most powerful is when it is done in combination with humans being in the loop.
Thanks, Perry. I'll come back to you in a minute, because I'm interested to know how hard it is to implement AI inside an HR department. Before I do,
can I just one thing on in relation to what Hari said? I think as you talk about this question around predictability and AI into the future, and particularly when we think about skills, one of the things that we are doing is helping organizations think about what are those skills that are emerging, what are those skills that are declining. We're actually doing that based on quite real data. So we are scraping job postings to see what's emerging, what's declining. Going beyond that into the kind of AI universe of augmenting that and going that step further feels like a little bit of a step too far at this stage. And I think that's why we probably see less of that happening. I think as time goes on, and maybe the reliance on AI and perhaps the confidence in the outcomes of AI becomes more and more prevalent, we might see more of it. But for right now, I think our clients would feel like we're going far enough in that particular piece. So the predictability piece is one we're using less AI for at this stage.
Mm-hmm. Todd, does that surprise you? Do both things surprise you? Our audience is saying that they're not actually making much use of AI as a predictive tool. Anthony's saying it's premature to think of it like that. The data is being created at Aon, but perhaps when that's fed into an AI algorithm, it will start to improve the predictive power of AI as a tool in HR. I mean, is your view that AI is going to improve over time as more and better data becomes available?
Oh, definitely. I think that AI that's the lifeblood of AI is the information, the data. The more sources, the better. And as I was saying earlier, and others have said, AI can actually process and synthesize large amounts of data, more than any person could, any individual manager, let's say, for example, to make a decision, and also integrate structured and unstructured data, which has never been able to be done before. And I think Anthony is describing a really interesting application of that. And Perry also mentioned it around skills information. Just imagine how that kind of data it's not like everybody in every company, either today or in the future, will have a definitive list of the skills all their employees have that's been verified and certified. We may get there someday, but it's unlikely. Most likely, there'll be some of that's structured data, but there'll be a lot of other information about what they do, presentations they've made, internal communications, privacy issues, of course, accounted for, material they've prepared and written, verbal presentations they've made, work they've done, systems they use, all kinds of information that would indicate what skills they have that AI can actually capture and integrate with structured data to make assessments about what their skill level is, and do it faster and more accurately, more efficiently than any individual human being could. So I share the optimism that others have pointed out, but it doesn't surprise me we're not there yet. What I just described is down the road for sure. However, and it doesn't surprise me that it's taking time, because this is very new technology, especially the latest advances in AI, generative AI, which was built on agentic AI, which is built on the foundation of generative AI, which was built on good old-fashioned predictive analytics. And this is all very new and needs to still be exploited. And I also think that companies are smart to take a deliberate approach here. This is, as Pari said, the human being in the loop is very important. Learning how to make this part of how you do your job, how it becomes part of how you execute, is going to take some time, and it has to be done deliberately and carefully. Otherwise, we could have people over relying on it when it's not yet there. To Eric's point earlier about it may not be perfect, and you need to have individuals making decisions based on it, but it becomes an incredibly valuable tool, and I think that's going to take some time for it to become embedded in how companies do things and how the HR function operates.
Eric, can I tempt you into one of your errors of optimism? You've just heard what Todd and Anthony have been saying about the current state of AI. It's not something which HR professionals can rely on. It's not going to operate autonomously. This is the error of optimism I'm seeking, do you foresee a time when HR actually can trust AI to make unsupervised decisions?
This one's hard because I think it gets dangerous. What I foresee in this regard, years from now, students in MBA programs, assuming that model continues to exist, but let's just go with that assumption, will be reading case studies of the organizations that used AI, got to automation, beat all of their competition, and they left it on autopilot, and then everything completely crashed and the company went under, right? That I think that isn't an impossibility. It's not far-fetched to think that that danger exists, because what I'd say, AI gets a lot of analogies. It's described a lot of ways. It's a tool. It's this. It's that. It's described in many, many ways. But one term that I've never heard used along with AI is intuition. The I does not stand for intuition. And to a certain extent, if we can put things on that they operate on, it's on autopilot, things go automatically, that could lead to a lot of efficiency. There could be a lot of opportunity there. And if the tools and the capabilities as they continue to grow, that should be the direction that we're going in. But if the check-in, if the intuition is lost, if discernment is left by the wayside because everything's just going by probability, well, at a certain point, I think that comes crashing down. So I think with the right balance and with the right degree of not forgetting when we need to check in and make sure that everything is still aligned with the business strategy, the HR areas of focus, and everything that we're trying to accomplish, considering the competitive landscape and everything else, it could, but there's definitely danger there.
Very good point, Eric, that probabilistic reasoning isn't always the right reasoning in all
But
circumstances.
if I can just chip in there, Dominic, and
Yeah.
this is a very, very powerful question, whether HR can trust AI to make decisions unsupervised. Well, what we are seeing is the way we would differentiate is if the decisions are repeatable, they're low risk and probably auditable, then perhaps yes, there are a few examples. So just to give you an example, in IBM, almost 94% of any HR queries is tackled by a platform we call Ask HR. Almost 94% of the queries. So if you need to know what your vacation balance is or whether your expenses have been paid, it's a simple rule-based decision. So, the platform will go into the core HR database, pull out your vacation balance, tell you that you've got 12 days left, and will also submit and apply that leave for you. It will go into a payment system or expense system and pull out and say whether your expenses have been paid. Now, they are low risk, fact-based, rule-based. So AI is almost driving those decisions for you. But if you have to make some complex choices, you're dealing with a restructuring or a grievance or scenarios where judgment is needed or there's ambiguity, you must have humans in the loop. So the AI capability is growing very, very fast. What we have seen is wherever it's repeatable, low risk, almost you can leave it on AI to do it. But where you need human judgment, where it involves ambiguity, we still recommend that you have humans involved in that.
All right, can I ask you a direct question, which I hope you can answer very directly and briefly? How hard is it to implement an AI system? You can obviously buy it as software as a service, or you can start to implement it in-house. In your experience, how hard are corporations finding it to implement a modern AI-driven HR system inside the organization today?
Dominic, was that question to me?
The question is how hard it is to implement AI in an HR department.
I don't think the hard part is around technology or the feasibility of technology. What we are saying is the organization's readiness and appetite to actually embed AI in their workflows and the ways of working. From a technology perspective, it's getting much and much easier. Most platforms are integrating with each, different platforms. There are pre-built APIs that are there. Most HR technology platforms are releasing and building AI features. It's all in their roadmap. I think the key shift is about organizations' readiness to adopt AI in their ways of working and in their HR workflows. That's the key thing to unblock. Technologically, it's not very difficult.
Okay, thanks, Perry. I went to my last 5 minutes, so let's spend this last few minutes just talking about how AI is going to impact the future of HR as a whole. Now, a lot of chief human relations officers dream that they are going to become crucial strategic advisors on people and help their organizations fulfill many of the functions we've talked about today, identifying future needs, that predictive function, plugging the gaps between the people they have now and the people they'll need in future, getting the skills they need to complete some upcoming major investment or project, looking to meld individuals into successful teams, manage all the risks which the organization faces, demographic, retirement, reputational, and so on, and actually make the process of introducing new technology, including AI, into the organization much simpler, so that the company can boost its revenues and boost its margins. Now, I suspect that most chief human relations officers, like everybody else, end up, in fact, not thinking strategically, but firefighting day-to-day issues. My question here really is whether AI is a game changer in that sense. Is it actually or potentially powerful enough to free up time for heads of HR to spend more time on things which are strategically important? Anthony brought up Moderna famously merging its HR and IT functions, which most of us read as the company viewing people and intelligent machines as kind of even alternatives, not just complementary, but actually possibly alternatives, which again might perturb flesh and blood employees who are anxious about being replaced by a machine. This is a big question, which I'd like to throw at all of you, whether the Moderna example means that the HR department could actually lead organizations into an AI-led future. So you apply AI in HR initially, it's an obvious use case. We, I think, proved that this afternoon. But does that mean that HR, as Moderna seems to be suggesting, is it the logical function to lead the adoption of AI throughout the organization? Anthony, perhaps you could address that first.
Yeah, sure, Dominic. And actually, I think this aligns really nicely with what Pari was just saying, because one of the keys to this is the adoption culturally of an AI way of working, an AI first mindset. And for us, that is absolutely the place that HR can take a leadership role, right? I'm not sure necessarily, based on the conversation we've had today, I think the perspectives of all of us, that HR aren't necessarily going to be at the vanguard from a technology standpoint within the function, but driving a culture of AI mindset is absolutely key. And happy to share an example from my own organization in Aon. Earlier part of this year, we actually rolled out an AI learning program across the top 3,000 employees in the organization. We're about 70,000 globally, to really ensure that those people were driving towards an AI first mindset. We find it often described as AI is like having 10 interns at your disposal. Are you delegating? Are you making use of those 10 interns? The technology is another question, is a second question. But if you say, where can HR lead and where's HR going to be at the vanguard, it is going to be about that culture change, that AI first mindset that organizations need to move closer to, because that's a significant change.
Thank you, Anthony. We're almost at time, but I'd be uncomfortable not answering an interesting question which Shailendra Desika has asked. As AI integration increases, what new skills or roles will be essential for HR professionals to master over the next few years to effectively partner with and manage people and businesses? Now, we've talked a lot today about the need to retain discernment and judgment. Eric's been particularly articulate on that. AI isn't going to be taking decisions for people, but it does mean that, and as Anthony pointed out, you need a different type of person in your HR department to make best use of AI. So what's the answer to that, to Shailendra's question? If I was planning a career in HR today, what sort of skills should I be taking into it? I don't know, that's probably a question for Eric to start with. Are you comfortable with that question, Eric?
Sure, and to try to be brief, the starting point is understanding I think it was the first question that we had of how is HR viewed and what is HR in the organization? If the remit, if the objective of HR is to handle the things that need to be handled, onboard the employees, make sure payroll is paid on time, deal with employee relations issues, then you just need to be more efficient and better at that than anyone else, and use AI to do those things efficiently. If it's a higher level of enabling the business, plugging into what the organization is trying to accomplish, and ensure that the people, strategy, and policies and programs are working in support of everything the organization is trying to accomplish, then it's actually the same as it always was. It's business acumen. It's understanding not just what is best practice in HR and how can we be world-class benefits, world-class this, world-class that. It's not about world-class. It's about what actually supports the business in achieving their objectives and winning the way that they're trying to win. So I think maybe something there that it's reassuring. Some things don't change, even with all of the uncertainty. That answer, I think, is something that we can keep as a constant.
Yeah. Dominic, I'll have a similar point of view, but one thing which might be a bit obvious, but I should still say it, is the skill set required by HR professionals is evolving quite dramatically, because the advancements that are happening in technologies and the ways of work is going at a certain pace. One of the key skills that we should continuously focus on is working with AI in whichever role you're playing, because the AI's capability is going to increase. So you as an individual, or we as HR professionals, need to continuously monitor, reflect, and learn and relearn how we can work with AI as a partner so that we are successful both in our personal and professional careers.
Dominic, I know we're almost at time, but just to build on those comments that everyone's made in Perry's last comment, if I were entering the field of HR today, I'd have to be thinking about what is the workforce going to look like in the future, the post-AI workforce, as I would call it. And it's going to be a workforce of humans and agents, and probably more contractors, because as companies make the transition from humans to agents for certain roles, I'm going beyond HR, I'm talking about the workforce running the business, they will probably rely more on contractors, if you will, temporary employees, to help with that transition. So in the future, HR is going to have to help the business to figure out how to manage that type of workforce. It will no longer just be human beings, or full-time employees, I should say. There will still be human beings, of course, but there'll be full-time employees, part-time employees, and agents. And they will be interacting to get work done, whether it's frontline, generating revenue generating work, or support, functions work, whatever it is. That HR has to be prepared to deal with that workforce reality, and using AI itself will help it enable it to manage the workforce differently and manage work differently in the future. There's speculation that the chief HR officer title is going to be changing to the chief work officer title, because it's going to be.
Is that, Todd, is that what being a strategic advisor on human capital actually means? And I'm asking you that because our final slide is here, our audience's answers. And they've given a very clear message that 2 and 3 of them think HR is going to evolve into being a strategic advisor on human capital. Only a quarter of them think things are going to carry on much as they are now. Only a tiny majority of them think that AI is going to lead us into the future through the HR department. So is that what being a strategic advisor on human capital means, what you've just been describing?
Well, I do. I think it means a few things, but that certainly means that. It means anticipating the people and people implications of where the business is headed and getting in front of those. And I would say HR is always meant to have been a strategic advisor. I just don't think it's been able to fulfill that part of its mission. And I've been doing it for 35 years as much as it could have. And I think AI now represents an opportunity to really not only to leverage it to handle the more execution and transactional parts of HR completely efficiently. Parry was talking about how those low risk activities where AI can now, like Ask HR, can now actually do it for you, but also to leverage it to on the more strategic side of HR in terms of supporting the business, supporting managers on how they manage people by giving them the ability to make better, smarter, faster decisions, not making the decision for them, but giving them a better solution set to work from, and then become role models for the rest of the company on how to integrate AI.
Mm-hmm. So if a younger Todd Gershkovitz was entering the industry now, would he expect in fairly short order to be on the HR equivalent of the Starship Enterprise with a sort of data field dashboard in front of him, adjusting recruitment and compensation and benefits to achieve shareholder value enhancing outcomes? I mean, is everything you've heard today, are you convinced that AI is going to transform the HR function?
I absolutely am. And I think it's the first time in the history of the function, really, the modern history of the function, where the technology exists to do that.
100%.
Yeah. Let's see if Eric, do you agree with that?
Time will tell, but it seems everything points in that direction, right?
Anthony, you're thinking this way. You've been quite cautious about how quickly it's going to happen, but it's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an awful lot to come, Dominic, is the answer. And the pace of change is the question.
Mm-hmm. Parry, it sounded like you already agreed with us. So we have to leave it there. We're out of time. We've even run over a little bit. That was a fascinating discussion. I'd like to thank you all, particularly our audience, for all your interest and questions and comments. I'd like to thank our panelists, Todd Gershkovitz from Pay Standards, Anthony Poole from Aon, Parry Singh from IBM Consulting, and Eric Weinberg from Prudential Financial. Here at Future Finance, our next event is a live one-day event, which is taking place exactly 1 week today in Frankfurt, 26th of November, 2025. That is the Digital Securities and Cash Summit. We're going to explore the ECB trials, tokenized deposits, deposit tokens, stable coins, and how financial market infrastructures can catalyze change, and how issuers and investors can be engaged in making change happen. So some resonances with today. It's all about making change happen. Here in Frankfurt, do join us. But for now, it's goodbye from the 5 of us. Goodbye.
Thank you.